This is the story of how I see trust and how we got to the current state of trust and where we might go with it. I happen to believe that long ago, all around the world, we used to understand how to live in community on the commons. Now, first, on the upper left there is a bunch of megafauna. First, we managed to kill off all the megafauna because humans were pretty efficient at killing machines at the large, slow animals. So we killed off megafauna. And then slowly over time, we figured out how to live in community on the commons. This was hard-won knowledge because a lot of communities wiped themselves out. The ones that destroyed their commons ended up overfishing or cutting all the timber off, or Easter Island, or name your calamity in society. But basically, really often it was because we fought each other to death, or we managed to eliminate that which sustained us. So if you go to the Dagara tribe in West Africa, if you go to the Quechua and Aymara tribes in South America, if you go to lots of communities around the world and you probe and you ask about their indigenous ways of knowing, their cosmologies, the stories they tell, the words in their language, you'll find they have words like reciprocity and stewardship and so forth, and really words about how to build and create community and how to take care of your commons. Now, somewhere along the road, we shattered this. We systematically went around the world and destroyed it, in fact. It's a painful topic. It causes lots of controversy. A bunch of people don't particularly want to have this conversation, and its causes are multiple. My own take on it is that somewhere around World War I, we sort of finally lost faith in humans, because before World War I, we have, the automobile, the early airplane, electrification, a whole bunch of technologies and things seem to be making life better. We're figuring out how a lot of things work. And then World War I is a stupid war. Like we feed people into machine guns, millions of people die. The frontier across the middle of Europe never moves more than like 14 miles one way or the other for 4 years. We just exhaust each other in this war. Then at the end of the war, we proceed to do a lot of stupid things. The end of World War I basically primes the world for World War II by making a whole series of stupid decisions. But on the whole, we kind of lost faith in humans in here, and we handed the world over slowly as things happened. But we started handing institutions over to mostly engineers, managers, white men to design things for efficiency, scale, and often profit. Why efficiency and scale? Well, there's so many humans. Population is growing. We've got to make sure that our systems are efficient. So we've got to build, these big industrial sorts of systems. And we told these designers, don't worry about the woo-woo stuff. We kind of demonized relationships, meaning, purpose, society, trust, important terms between humans. They were soft stuff. They were intangibles. They were very hard to invoke on command. So we kind of told these designers, no, build for efficiency and scale, automate and use coercion when you need to, because these things are not very reliable. So these designers went and industrialized every sector of human activity, not just industry. That also means they standardized, automated, commoditized, and a word I really like, consumerized, every sector of human activity. So not just industry. What do I mean? So consumerized comes from consumer, so you think consumer goods, toothpaste, floor wax, consumables, all that kind of thing. And I don't mean just laundry, Tide and Dove. I also mean culture. So long ago, we used to memorize poems and plays. We used to put on musicals ourselves. We would play music for each other. And a few people still do that, but generally it's like, is it Nintendo or Netflix and chill? We've automated culture. We've turned it into consumer mass marketing stuff. It's more stuff to acquire and do and pay for. Our identities. Do you think that you are beautiful? Do you think that you are enough? Well, chances are you don't think either thing, because there's a bunch of people in the fashion industry and other places that would like you to buy more stuff to look cool and hip and trendy for the next season. So we've sort of consumerized both clothing and identity and all the artifacts we put on our bodies. That's how we create our identities, through the purchasing of brands, sort of these secondary attributes. That's the consumerization of identity. Same thing for health, our food system, shelter, spirituality, governance. We no longer come together in town halls and make decisions together about how to govern. Now, generally what happens is every 4 years we have a major election where we get asked for money over and over and over again, because that money is going to be put into the advertising machine to basically prompt us to vote for A or B. That's not actually governance. That is some kind of consumer mass marketing politics. So we consumerized everything. And I can go way deep. Anywhere you see a little green marker here that says more, that means I could go off on a tangent here. And if we had a magical hypertext that allowed you to go and come back, I would use that. But here we are on YouTube. So what happened was we designed most of our institutions from mistrust of the average person. We assumed that, anybody could do something wrong, so we might as well design for those people. We designed for them up front. That means we normalized a whole bunch of really odd behaviors. For example, the language of advertising is the language of war. Advertising is like going to war with those consumers to try to get them to buy more stuff. You launch campaigns against target demographics. You pay by the impression. You're trying to achieve market penetration. We're at war. Meanwhile, we're busy vacuuming up all of your exhaust data and stalking you, as you can see when Zappos follows you from website to website with that same shoe you lingered on for a little too long on the Zappos website. Never mind Zappos, plenty of others that are sort of mixing and sharing all of our data to stalk us to get us to buy more stuff. In other areas, we created a compulsory education system, not trusting that children might be curious and that we might be able to actually teach them well. Our system before the industrialization of schooling around the Civil War through World War I basically had thousands upon thousands of one-room schoolhouses that were doing a pretty good job. America was quite literate back in the day. We're overprotecting intellectual property. Jack Valenti, former head of the Motion Picture Association of America, is famous for having said that I would love copyright to last forever minus a day. Craziness, and basically stealing from the commons of culture and information that we all rely on together. And then we've also militarized our police. Something goes wrong, we send in a SWAT team. In a school, a situation that would previously have gotten a child sent to the principal now has police or SWAT come in, and all kinds of really bizarre things are happening. So I'm calling these things weird names, the stalker economy, but I think you recognize that these are all things we take for granted. That stalking is what companies are doing right now. The compulsory education system is where we put our kids. A company that did a great job of protecting its intellectual property is like bang on great entrepreneurs, and I would suggest that these are actually odd behaviors that don't go well with living in community on the commons. Sadly, as we did all of this, we turned ourselves from citizens into consumers, or we were turned into it. I'm not sure what the causality is, but I know that if you're in government and you're trying to defend citizens, you're trying to defend my right to have fair housing and equity, fairness, access, rights to free speech, things of that nature. If you're just trying to protect consumers, what you want is everyday low prices. And if a big box store happens to wipe out all the little mom and pop stores in town, that's too bad. That led to everyday low prices, so that's clearly a good outcome from that measuring stick. But it wasn't really good for the local town, in particular when that big box store then closes and goes away. Look at a movement called Reburbia, attempts to do something with those empty big box stores. So as consumers, we've ended up alienated, separated from each other, pretty lonely. Even though we're densely packed, we don't make a lot of contact with other people. We're kind of stupider than we otherwise would be because we're mere consumers and not engaged citizens. Alas, keeping trust broken serves a whole bunch of interests. Keeping us not trusting ourselves and not loving our, who we are as we are means we will buy more stuff and need more stuff because we have to keep up with the Joneses. Keeping us thinking we're not attractive means we'll buy more clothes. And these are sort of the surface, more simple kinds of forces. Under the hood, keeping us fearful of other kinds of people really serves other people. So. A few parties out in the political sphere have managed to weaponize trust. They've got us fearful of science, of journalism, of foreigners, fearful of the opposition because those people are crazy, fearful of facts because facts are not facts anymore, right? We're in the post-truth era, post-fact era. These things are craziness, and this is a rapid spiral downward, and you're seeing electoral success around the world as authoritarian populists get elected. Orban, Bolsonaro in Brazil, all over the place. There are these far-right actors who have come into power because they've weaponized trust. All of this is inflaming recent crises, and when you get everybody heated up and start breaking trust and turning people against each other, in particular now when word travels faster and when ordinary people have power tools and power weapons like drones, let's say, you better figure out where the bill is going to get paid at the end. All of this would be really depressing, and I would like send a counselor to you right now as you're watching this video. But I want to tell you that we're busy rediscovering trust, that I have found movements around the earth that are doing something that I call design from trust. Not design for trust, but rather from trust, from an assumption, a working assumption of trust. And when I'll describe these things to you, and it sounds a little bit like leaving the key in the front door, and it kind of is that, because vulnerability is one of the examples of how design from trust works. So let me say a little bit more about it. It starts from a premise that people are more trustworthy than we think they are. That our general assumption of skepticism and fear for everyone, which is, if you ever watch the local news in your city, you'll leave fearful. The general assumption here is that you can assume good intent on the part of the next person coming through the door. If you've done any work in open source software or on the internet, assume good faith or assume good intent is kind of a simple meme, a simple phrase in that culture. But what this leads you to, what it led me to, is the idea that most of our institutions need a redesign from trust because they've been designed from mistrust. We need to figure out how to flip them around. What on earth does that mean? So just so you have a little bit more tangible example of what design from trust is, the Wikipedia is my favorite example of design from trust. Remember the day when you noticed how Wikipedia works, when you noticed it's this little thing that says, edit this page. How did you feel? What emotions were running through your mind as you realized that any idiot on earth can come in and edit the world's encyclopedia? Like, kind of weird, right? So that's an example of design from trust. Hold that thought. Another example is in governing the commons, and unfortunately in 1968, a soil biologist named Garrett Hardin wrote an essay, The Tragedy of the Commons, which stuck in everybody's head. And it wasn't a great essay. It was kind of misinformed because he was making all sorts of assumptions that basically everybody will eat up a commons, that greedy behavior will dominate, so commons are effectively impossible. And we've got this as a thing in our heads, like scarcity equals value or time is money. They're these little sayings, and tragedy of the commons lets people dismiss commons right away because no, they always result in tragedy. Well, fortunately, it turns out that Lynn Ostrom won the Nobel Prize for figuring out the principles for governing commons. And she originally submitted 8. This is a slightly longer list of 10. But following these principles actually helps people learn how to build trust in one another in local communities. So you'll notice in 3 and 9, for example, that being very local, that devolving authority right to the fingertips to the people closest to a commons is one of the governing principles. So she did some really effective work in figuring out how to take care of commons together. Muhammad Yunus won a different Nobel Prize because he gave a very small loan, something on the order of a little more than $20, to a group of women in Bangladesh, and those women repaid him. And in fact, as this became a mature industry and lots of companies entered it, lending money to people with no collateral, meaning they had no assets to put up that the bank might take away if the loan wasn't repaid, the repayment rates were better than those for normal loans that have, people who passed a credit check and did have collateral. So what's up with that? This is an act of trust as well. So microfinance is designed from trust. Now here's 3, I just gave you 3 examples of design from trust, and you might notice that there are sort of 2 predictable responses. At least I've seen this, and maybe if I describe them to you, you'd be like, okay. These are a way of noticing when you've hit a new system designed from trust. So the first one is, oh shit, this is impossible. It's crazy. It's never going to work. Who had this stupid idea, right? And at this point, some people bounce. They don't try the Wikipedia anymore. They're like, dismiss it. This is impossible, so I won't use it. A bunch of other skeptics just wander on in, and then they go to some area in a topic they know a lot about, whether it's Buffy the Vampire Slayer or neurobiology or whatever, and they discover that it's actually really pretty good. And they discover that the Britannica would never have had a page on every episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, never mind a page about Buffy studies, which is an academic field of endeavor. There you go. But then everybody goes, this is naive. Like design from trust is so stupid because everybody knows that there's bad actors in the world. And yes, like Wikipedians are clearly aware of bad actors. Vandals come in, like if I were 14 years old, what more amusing thing than to go into Wikipedia, change a page, and leave something awful on it? Except it's easier to revert changes than to vandalize things that are designed from trust, often, not always. And so we deal with bad actors in there, and And after a while, people hit a second predictable response to systems designed from trust. And this is again an oh shit reaction, except this time it's, oh shit, no way. This really works. This seems to be really working, and it feels kind of interesting and good. It feels kind of weirdly warm and connective. And I just want to say that this second insight is at the same time thrilling and really depressing. It's thrilling because, yes, I want people to have that sense and to understand it and to go look for more. And it's really depressing because this is a signal to me of how deeply we've internalized the left brain, paternalistic, hierarchical, linear, industrial mindset, mostly a male mindset, of control and coercion, which is how everything seems to work. And we accept that that's the way it all needs to work. And so we have a long way to go to kind of hit undo on all those things and unravel them so that we can get back to some place where we're living inside of systems designed from trust, which have a lot of benefits. So remember the little petri dish image here that I said we're rediscovering trust? Well, one of these little fuzzy batches of bacteria is actually a collection of movements I've discovered around the world that have already been instituting design from trust. They don't, any of them, call it that, because I'm trying to bring that to the party here to help people understand how these things are similar to one another. But I just talked about governing the commons and wikis. So here's open source software, crowdsourcing. The internet was designed from trust, and open everything is kind of a placeholder for a whole bunch of things. So open science, amateur astronomy, open government, open scientific journals, garage biology, the public domain, freedom to tinker, which means the freedom to open up things you buy and change them and fix them, open patents. So some of these different clusters are pretty rich just by themselves. Here we have policing by consent and restorative justice. Down on the left, the sharing economy, microfinance I talked about, the basic income guarantee, peer-to-peer lending, cooperatives. On the right, peer-to-peer everything, open space and unconferences, which are basically self-organizing conference methods. The decriminalization of drugs, for example, time banking. These are all designed from trust. And I could, as you might imagine, go on and on about any one of these at some length. And some of my personal heroes are the people who developed a lot of these movements. So if I had to summarize, I would say systems designed from mistrust are trying to control crowds. They're trying to make their lives better, but in order to control crowds, they design to trap and stop the bad actors first, to achieve efficiency and scale. But by doing that, they often separate us from each other and limit what we can do within the system. To promote more usage, they focus on individualism, but often have to rely on coercion to actually make the system work. In systems designed from trust, we're really looking for cooperation, not control. We want to deal with the bad actors last. Wait to mess up the system to limit bad actors as long as possible. In fact, if you can turn a bad actor into a good actor, that is a huge win. And really what we want is the genius and thriving of the whole, not just efficiency and scale. And to get there, we're going to emphasize our interdependence, not our individualism, so that we can click people into community and get them to understand that when they learn how to work together, when they learn the particular rules of this double Dutch dance in one of these spheres or another, that's when they actually move into some really good place. So finally, what are the benefits? Why would you want to design from trust? And I've just picked my favorite three here. One is that trust is cheaper than control. That if you think about the costs of control, let's say you want more security in some place, so you put cameras up, and then you have to record the videotapes, and then you have to store and archive the videotapes, and then you have to prosecute and catch people who violate by going through the tape. I mean, there's a whole architecture of security and control that goes behind it. And maybe if people who are participating in the space could catch wrongdoers or bad actors and deal with them, that would be a lot cheaper. Open source software doesn't require protections. I don't know if you're old enough to remember the days of early software where there were all sorts of software protection schemes that everybody griped about, because when you ran things you had to insert a special disk or even plug a dongle into one of the ports in your computer so that it would unlock the software. Open source software and our present software models are much cheaper to do. Trust also unlocks abundance. I went to business school, and one of the phrases they taught me was that scarcity equals value. And And I think scarcity equals value is kind of a screwed up way of seeing what's going on. I'll propose to you instead that scarcity is abundance minus trust. You can have a setting in the world where there is a lot of abundance, and if you remove trust from it, the trust that allows us to preserve that abundance and grow that commons, what you end up with is scarcity. Now, scarcity equals value is basically licensed to any capitalist to go out and create scarcity where there is none, on purpose, because then there's value, then there's a business model. I think this actually sucks for the world. Just go look at the story of water in Bolivia, where they passed the law that privatized all water, including water that fell on your roof and got drained into a bucket you put, out by the gutter. And Bechtel was supposed to administer that, and shit hits fan. It really, really ended badly, but it ended in the undoing of those regulations. And then finally, trust unlocks genius. And when I say unlocks, I mean there's already genius in the room when you bring people together. It's just that our assumptions about people, that there's so many bad actors, that people are so dumb, that they're not trustworthy, limit the genius we get from any collection of humans. But in fact, there is a whole bunch of genius in there. And if you design from trust, you design in ways that let that genius march to where it is best used, from self-awareness, from feedback from other people, however that might work. But if we have systems that rely on people figuring out where they fit and how best to apply their work in collaboration with other people, we get better results overall. This brings me to my favorite phrase of the last decade, which is also the name of my TEDx talk, what if we trusted you? It implies that we kind of don't trust you right now because from my history of trust, I'm saying that we lost faith in humans, we lost trust in humans, and we've designed everything from the assumption that the next person coming through the door is not trustworthy. But what if we flipped that around? What if we said, as a starting point, we'll trust you. You might lose our trust, in which case we got to figure that out. But we're going to start from this assumption that most people have good faith or good intentions and go from there. That is my story of trust. I hope it's been useful to you. I would really love any comments and look forward to making this better. Thanks.